This is Joe back again with Mel from the Strong Family Project. We have a special episode with guest today. Mel, can you get us started?
Sure. Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, special edition, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
And joining us today, we have Audrey and Bonnie from the Outnumbered Podcast, who truly are outnumbered. In our opinion, they have, which one has 10?
That's me.
Bonnie has 10. Audrey has 9 children. And we've been listening to their podcast now for over a month ourselves. So we picked up a lot of great content, and we're honored that they're able to join us today so that they can share some of their ideas with our audience as well. So could you first tell us a little bit about your podcast? And then Mel was asking us before we pressed record, how'd you get started with it 4 years ago?
Our podcast is a podcast where we talk about everything from practical kids stuff, like how to potty train and how to breastfeed and that kind of stuff, to mom stuff. We're pretty passionate about self-care and moms taking care of themselves so they're in good condition to take care of their kids. And we always try to have a segment or in consideration of the young, overwhelmed mom, because both of us were there at one time. And then our specialty is large families. So we get asked so many of the same questions over and over again that we decided, we're just going to record them. And then people can all over the country, all over the world, actually, we have listeners all over the world, can hear the answers to the questions that everybody seems to have about big families. And so we just love to share what people consider our wisdom, but mostly we think it's by trial and error. Sometimes we're like, don't do what we did. So
I was listening to something today, and they said to be experienced, you have to go through experiences. And I think you two are on the lightning fast path to getting more parenting experiences further than many of us. So we really appreciate that and appreciate you joining us. And just so the listeners know, what are the age ranges of the children?
Yeah, my family, Bonnie, is, the oldest is almost 18. So we're about to have our first adult, super exciting and also terrifying. And then our youngest is 2, and we have kids basically every other year and one set of twins. So all the ages.
And this is Audrey, and our kids are from 24 down to 4, and ours are spaced. The minimum is 2 years apart, and most of them are closer to 3 years apart. So we ended up with all the ages.
And do you both homeschool, have spent some time homeschooling, or have done a mixture?
Yeah,
We both homeschool.
Yeah, since the beginning. So all kinds of crazy over here.
Well, that's awesome. We did it for 1 year when schools were closed, public schools. Mel stepped up and did homeschooling for a year because we just didn't want our kids to get that married to technology. And she did a great job homeschooling 2 of them at that time. One of them was too young. So that's incredibly impressive that you have such a wide variety of ages. And I was a high school teacher myself. And sometimes I go down 6th grade and it felt like a different world down there. And then I go back to teach seniors. Wow, there is a big difference in the how you approach the different age groups, and you do it all at once. You ready for some questions? We got a bunch for you to maximize your time.
Let's do it.
I want to speak specifically to what Audrey mentioned was your passion, which is helping out young and frazzled parents. And they may not have, they probably don't have 10 or 9 children. They may have the first one on the way, but they still are running through that friction of how do I make time for me? How do I make time to prepare my family? What are the ways that I can stay organized? How do I take care of my health and fitness? All those things that they're thinking about juggling at the beginning. What are some overarching tips you can give them?
First of all, if you can't do it for yourself, sometimes when we start on the self-care journey, it feels pretty selfish because all the kids have so many needs. And a lot of times what we talk about is urgent versus important. And kids are very urgent with their needs. Mom, I have a hangnail. It's right now. It doesn't matter that you need to eat or go to the bathroom. I've got this hangnail and I'm going to die. Very urgent, but not necessarily as important. And sometimes we confuse urgent and important, and we end up putting all those urgent needs first. And then as the young, overwhelmed moms, we're just spent at the end of the day, nothing left for ourselves. And so one way that it worked for me to start prioritizing myself and my health, my mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all that, was to say, I'm doing this for my kids. So this really is just another thing I'm doing for my kids. And then starting to get into a space where I felt better then I could do it for me. But at first, for me, I just had to rename it as another thing I did for my kids.
That's a great approach. We use the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you just feel drained all the time, you can't pour into your family like you would want to. And we get a lot of kind of tactical questions for parents, like, how do I handle this discipline issue and things like that? And sometimes it's, how are you doing? Are you frazzled going into that situation or not? It's not like what you say necessarily in the situation, but how you say it. And taking care of yourself is a big piece of that.
That's right. I think for a lot of families, they don't find the time during the day. So I guess my question is, how do you then find a time to make sure you're connected with your spouse?
Ooh, this is a good question. We actually have a whole series on marriage in our podcast because we feel like if you don't take care of yourself and you don't take care of your spouse, then the whole family falls apart, right? Regardless of what the kids' needs are. But we personally, both Audrey and I, are really dedicated to date nights. We do everything we can during the week to maintain that relationship. So anything from a fun text or a phone call whenever possible. My husband likes to call me on his way home from work because it's a time that he has in the car and I can chat while I'm making dinner. But date nights are huge for us, and in the early years when we were poor and had a bunch of little kids, it would look like putting everybody to bed early and watching a movie together, or, like, making a fun dinner, getting takeout or something. Later on, now we have kids that can babysit, yay for free babysitters, and then so we do leave more regularly. But date nights are essential, and there were many weeks where I just thought, "I'm too tired, I don't wanna go anywhere or do anything." But we still did them because we knew that if we were not at least weekly spending one-on-one dedicated time with each other, things were gonna deteriorate fast.
That's amazing. Audrey, do you have anything to add to date night?
Oh, Bonnie was much better at being dedicated to this than I was. But because of our situation for a long time, all of my husband and I's dates were in home after the kids went to bed. Just we do something together. I want to expand on it a little bit. Something as your kids get older, maybe speaking to the young, overwhelmed mom, you not only get free babysitters as your kids grow, but that means like your trips can get longer. So we've really discovered and super gotten dedicated to couples trips, like just overnight or for a weekend. And those are like intense workshops on your marriage. Yeah. And it doesn't feel like work at all because it's so much fun. Like, just, you know what it's like if you go on a date and you have the baby with you or a kid with you. Both mom and dad are focused on the kid or the baby because because you're good parents. That's what you're doing. And that's great. But this, so these date nights when it's just you and your spouse, or when you get to along farther in your relationship and you have kids that can babysit, or maybe you have family that come in and you can do like a whole dedicated focus weekend on just the two of you. It's really worth it. It's such a struggle to make it happen, but it is so worth it.
There's a great nuance in there that you both included, which I think as a young parent, we assumed date night was like you went out to a restaurant. Like that was the expectation. And like when it started, that wasn't our reality because you
Mhm.
can't really go out with kids. And then we started to add like our date night is we go for a walk and now maybe we'll go for a hike for a couple hours. But it's just connection time. It didn't have to be almost going out to dinner stressed us out more because we didn't have any money at the beginning. Then you had to go to a restaurant and there's more noise there than there was at home. And it's too much for me.
You even sometimes have to get up in the morning and spend some time together then. Because in the evening, the kid, now that we have some older kids, they want to hang out a little later, chit chat about things that might have come up throughout the day. So, what does your morning routine look like? Whether it's for you as an individual mom or a couple, or even for once your kids are up, what does that look like?
I can just say for our family, I personally am really dedicated to exercise. I haven't always been, of course, because in the early morning days of having a new baby and being pregnant and exhausted, that doesn't always happen. But I found that for me, it is a huge boon to both my self care, my emotional stability, and just feeling strong and capable. There's a lot of physical demands on my life as a mom. And so I get up and I go exercise, I'll go run or go to the gym or something. And then I have some dedicated spiritual time for myself, whether it's journaling or reading scripture or whatever it is to pull me in contact with the higher being. And then I can go out and tackle my day. So does that happen every day? No, absolutely not. There are nights when somebody's up sick and I have to sleep in or whatever. But if at all possible, that's what I start my day with.
My day starts with some, okay, time out just a second. You guys are okay with us sharing Christian stuff, right?
Yes, for
Yes, you
sure.
don't have to time out 'cause Bonnie's morning sounds very similar to Mel's morning.
Yep.
Gets up,
I just
in
started.
the other order. We starts with the scripture reading,
Yep.
and then we do our family exercise after we drop the kids off to school.
And that's fairly new for me. I only started doing that maybe a few months ago. It's really been great.
Yeah, it's hard to do with little kids around for sure. They have a lot of demands.
Yeah,
So
but
my
continue, Audrey.
Okay. So my day starts with on my knees with my husband. We pray together in the morning, and then we both will go shower, make coffee or whatever. And then we'll spend time reading our Bibles together. So that has been like, we don't always hit date night, but the majority of the days of the week, we begin worshiping God together to start the day, because that has been key for a relationship. Like, it's starting the day reminding ourselves what this is all about, why we're doing this. And when we can do that together, it's like we're on a team. So we're going into this day as a team. And something I did early on at my husband's encouragement was teach our kids how to make breakfast. It's the easiest meal of the day, and doesn't really matter if they mess it up because you're getting another meal in a couple hours. So I taught my kids to make breakfast really early on. And that is really sweet for me, but also it allows my husband and I to definitely have that time together where we can be sitting down and reading our Bibles together. Not necessarily uninterrupted, because you have to go help whenever in the kitchen, or mom, the oven's on fire, or you name it. But then you're still there together, starting your day. It's like the purpose. And then I think it's super important when our kids see us doing like that, starting our day like that. It sets the tone for their day and for their future.
I like that I'm hearing that you sounds like you're very passionate about being intentional with what you're doing and what your kids see you doing. And a big piece of what we try to do with our children is set core values within our family. We have 6 core values that we together decided upon. And it basically, everything we do filters through those values. And I'm wondering if you have, I know you have values in your family, but do you have them written down? Have you chosen them? How do you work that into your family life?
I'll let Audrey start with that one.
Okay. Bonnie, I'm trying to think of that episode that we did. It was something about family motto. I think that one might be good if people are looking for like specifics. But so we don't have ours written down. Bonnie will share hers in a minute, and it's really cool. But we don't have ours written down, but more overarching principles that no matter what, we put them first. So one of our things is operating our family, like you said, very intentionally. But we have this thing we call 20-year vision. So every day, every decision, every relationship is with this 20-year vision in mind. How is this going to play out in 20 years? What's this going to look like if I make this decision, or if I have this relationship, or, what's this going to do to my relationship in 20 years? So looking forward 20 years is pretty cool way to be intentional about what you're doing with your life. That is one of our definite guiding principles for our family.
How did you pick 20 years?
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know. What's really cool is recently my husband and I have been hitting some 20-year goals where we can look backward. 7 years ago, we hit 20 years of marriage. And 4 years ago, we hit a child that turned 20. And so we could look back at how some of these 20-year visions have played out, some of these decisions that we made with a 20-year vision in mind. And that's real cool. Now we're getting old enough where we have 20 years going forward and 20 years looking back.
That's an awesome place to be, and I appreciate you being honest and saying, "Hey, we just chose a number," and sometimes that's it with parenting. You just have to choose something and go,
Yeah.
versus, like, living in this lukewarm, "Is this right or is this not right?" It's usually different versions of, like, it doesn't really matter if it's 18, 19, 20, 22. It's
Right.
that you guys are pick something and you're following it, and so Mel and I talk about that a lot. We share our core values, but we tell people, like, they don't have to be the same as yours. You just have something that you think is important for your family to strive toward, and that's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Bonnie.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention about Audrey's that I really love is that it helps me in my reaction time, because we've adopted some of that too. What do we look like? What are things going to look like in 20 years? If someone's melting down, or there's an accident, or something bad is happening, keeping the perspective of that 20 years just simmers everything down. Is this going to matter in 20? Is it going to matter in 5? No, probably not. And really focusing on the things that will matter in 20, how I'm treating my children, that they feel they can come to me to talk about something. So that was another thing I want to mention about that. A few years ago, I realized that the majority of the things I was trying to teach my children were respect in one form or another. So we created just a big poster that says Wiscoms are respectful. That's our last name. So we respect our bodies, we respect our home. So things like drawing on the wall and hitting each other and doing these naughty things. So we found a way to work in respect for all of these things. We respect God, we respect our community, we respect laws. So that's what ours looks like. And it really does work for just about every aspect of life. And so when we are having problems, we're saying, is this a respectful thing to do to your sibling? It's a respectful thing to do to the home. What about your own body and your own mind? So that's worked really well for us.
I love that. I love that it seems like you're being very consistent with how you're applying that because it relates to all those different areas. When you first thought of that idea, did you consider it with your husband beforehand? Did you develop it with your kids? And I'm wondering, at what point did you see them really adopt it?
I am a control freak. So no, I just came up with that on my own. And I told everybody this is what we're doing. I
That's
did
okay.
I did sit down with my husband and say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Can you get behind this? He goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. Anything that keeps kids Sharpies off the wall and keeps them from hitting each other, let's do it. And so we sat down and talked about it. And I asked if they thought they could get behind that. And of course, in a lovely family meeting, they're like, oh, yeah, sure. That sounds great. So we made this big poster and we framed it. And every now and again, it's, oh, that means that, huh? Oh, what I have noticed is that kids, while it obviously takes longer for them to adopt it for their own behavior, they are very quick to notice it in somebody else's behavior, which is good. Yeah, it starts somewhere, right? And they'll say, hey, that wasn't respectful, or that wasn't this or that. One thing they've noticed is my own language. They'll say, oh, yeah, is telling us to be quiet in a rude voice. Is that respectful, moms? Noted.
They call you out.
Yeah, so which is so great because I want to be obviously the first example in and being respectful. So it's been really fun watching them adopt it and try it out on each other.
That's great. I have shared this on a different podcast episode, but we're respectful to each other, specifically in communication, like you mentioned. That is a great way to role model. And Mel spoke sternly to like he was like 4 at the time, our youngest, and whatever the situation was, and he's just looking at her, and Mel's wondering why she's not getting a reaction, and he's, Mom, why are you being so noisy right now? So noisy.
We try to keep it
He had
really
never heard
calm.
someone raise their voice. It was
Yes.
just
Right. I think there's a way you can command a child's respect and attention without having to raise your voice, which is one of the goals that we have. But yeah, he called me noisy. But you touched on something when you were talking about how the kids would call you out. And in our podcast, we call that tough truths. We
Mhm.
actually make a piece of our family meeting, which I'm going to ask you about as well, because you mentioned that. Is that something that both of you foster in your families where you can call each other out because you want to be role models and admit that we as parents obviously make mistakes?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. We talk about that a lot. So we allow our kids to give us, we call it like feedback. And it's definitely, it needs to be in a respectful way, respect of your parents' authority, but, and in a time like not in the moment. Like we really encourage our kids, if they're being disciplined or getting corrected about something and they have some feedback right at that instant, they're kids. Their motive isn't going to be the right motive. But after a while, if they've thought about something, they really come to us with a concern. Absolutely. Of course, we're open to that. And we want and accept and love and respond to feedback because we're family. And what would it be if we didn't like all flex with each other and move? You don't want to be like the rigid parent without any movement. But at the same time, you need to give your kids an example of something that they can look up to and respect. And I mean, there will be authority figures in their life. You, of course, hope that God is their authority figure. And like God is perfect and us as parents are not perfect. So there's that's not the same, but also just a general respect for authority is something kids can learn from their parents. And so yes and no, like with a modicum of respect. And because our kids do respect us so much, when they come to us with some feedback, we take that really seriously because we know it comes from a place of respect.
It sounds like you've created the culture in your family to allow for that, which I really
Yeah.
respect as well.
yeah, so
Bonnie, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't know about you guys, but I did feel like the generation that our parents came from, that was not really taught to be able to ask for and take feedback. And I think it was more of an authoritative kind of parenting style. And it was more like my way or the highway, at least in the family that I grew up in, which I also admired how my parents parented. They did the best they knew how. Having to learn this without a model was a little bit tricky for me. And I learned very early on that my humility was key. If I wanted to be a good parent, then I needed to be able to listen, even when they were very young and had very, what I thought were simple needs. I needed to acknowledge that I have no idea how they're feeling or thinking. It's been a long time since I was 4 or 7 or 12. And to be able to sit there and go, tell me what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and that each child is so different. One child might be able to be disciplined in a certain way and take it perfectly. And the next one might be way too sensitive for that. And you need to be able to be willing to, cater things to each child the best way they need how. And that just requires a lot of humility from a parent to say, you're right. I shouldn't have done it like that. I will try better.
And that leads us right to the next question that we get asked all the time, and it's a super vague question, so it's very difficult for us to answer. So we'll have you answer it instead. And we get this question that comes in: how do you discipline your kids?
Ooh, that's a
It's
good
kind of
question.
open-ended and vague. We can just go. What's one tip or suggestion you give parents to chew on about disciplining or correcting? I heard you say earlier, Audrey, because the language is an important piece too.
Sure. I'll give you like Bonnie was saying, it's so specific to each situation and each kid. Like I can't say this is how we parent or this is how we discipline, this is how we correct, because it depends on the kid and the situation and everything. But one jumps to mind that I think maybe your audience and you guys might be interested in. And that is we have a zero tolerance policy for sibling fighting. And that sounds pretty harsh, but we bring into play our 20-year vision with our kids. And we say to them, do you guys want to be friends when you are in 20 years? Because I know that each of you are going to be really cool people when you grow up. And you're going to want to have a friend like your sibling that you're fighting with. And your way that you're behaving right now is not going to make you friends in 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, right? And so think about that when you're interacting with your sibling. And yeah, they're kids. We have a whole episode on sibling rivalry. But what we don't tolerate is, okay, so let me put it this way. We have 9 children and we live in a 3-bedroom house. So at the end of the day, they are going to be sleeping with their siblings, right? So at the end of the day, they have to go to bed friends. And so they're like, there's nowhere else to sleep. There's no other options. They have to sleep with their siblings. And so the key here is that keeping the friendship through the day and repairing. Thank you. You have to go out and shut the door. Sorry, guys. She brought me flowers.
Awesome.
So keeping their relationship through the day in such a condition that they can sleep together at the end of the night, at the end of the day, is just what we're aiming at. Like they have to do it because what are you going to do? Lay in bed and kick your brother all night because you fought with him all day? It's just not going to work. So that's getting long-winded, but we do have, it's something that we nip right in the bud is the fighting. Like we don't let it go on. We don't let, work it out and learn on their own, but we're guiding them very specifically on the kind of relationships and friendships they need to have with their siblings.
Well, 2 quick things on that. First, I love how you ask them questions so that they have to consider the outcome of their decisions. Okay, you're either going to sleep with one eye open or you're going to have to figure this out. And also credit to you because Mel's noticed that I've used the term nip in the bud on 3 consecutive podcast episodes now, and you just used it for this one. So now we're going to keep the streak going because I think I used to say nip in the butt. And then I realized it was a gardening thing and nipping in the bud. But somehow that's got into my vernacular, and now we're going to keep the streak alive. So I appreciate that, Audrey. Bonnie, what's your thoughts on discipline?
Yeah, the word discipline has some really negative connotations these days. People are thinking spare the rod, spoil the child, like discipline is heavy handed. But I like to think of discipline, like I'm pretty sure it's related to the word disciple. And a discipline, like in education, is a field of knowledge. And what if I'm just teaching my child the discipline of being part of our family and how to be a disciple of God or Christ? This is what we're teaching them is no, that's not appropriate. What's appropriate is this respect. What's appropriate is this kind of behavior. And it's just constantly pulling them back in line. I feel like that's life, right? It's trying this road and it's trying this road and it's trying this path. And the job of parents is to just veer them back. Oh, I know that one looks interesting. It looks fun to just poke your brother over and over because you get a reaction. But I'm going to pull you back here because what we're teaching you, these values say that we want to be peacekeepers. We want to have love in our home. So I love just looking at it a little bit differently and thinking that what is the frame of reference that I'm teaching them?
I really appreciate that you have that mindset. So you're not approaching discipline as punitive, but as a learning experience. And we just did a little mini podcast the other day about how we try to approach every opportunity with our kids as an opportunity for learning, not necessarily. We ask ourselves, what do we want to get out of this? We don't want them to leave the room feeling defeated and terrible about some decision they made. We want them to leave feeling like they have some control over making it better. or have some tools so that next time they make a better decision, which the 20-year vision would really play well into. I wrote that one down because I definitely want to use that and being humble. And did you have more on next? I had a different question to go a
I
different way.
Yeah, I just one more thing that sometimes read our kids some passages from the Discipline Equals Freedom book that Jocko wrote, where it's associating discipline with positive behaviors because you said most people think it is negative, and I would agree at that age, they think it's something that's done to them, but if you have self-discipline, it's a different ballgame, like you shared, you get up and exercise, and you read, and you journal, like, those are all disciplines that give you a more free life, and if you didn't have those, you wouldn't have as free of a life, you'd have more chaos in your life, and it's simple things as the morning routine. Our kids get up just the other day, our 5-year-old has felt left out because we give our kids a minimum effective dose of exercise. We don't want them to exercise a lot in the morning because, like, we got a lot going on. We just want to build a habit. So it's 5 to 10 minutes. They do a couple things down in our home gym, and our 5-year-old was feeling left out. So now he, like, leaves his door open a little, so he hears when the other ones get up, and he gets up in his old Dino PJs, and he does 10 box jumps. He does 20 body weight rows. He does 30 squats, and that's his morning workout, and that's his discipline for the morning so that he can be a stronger person. Like, he gets it at that age because of the language change that we've had in our house, and I appreciate you mentioned that, Bonnie, and don't wanna talk too much on it. I know you had another question, Mel.
I'm going to leave that one for a minute because you made me think of something else even better. Since we only have the three kids, so obviously the 5-year-old looks up to the other two, and a lot of what he does is based on what they do. And I wonder if you have any advice or examples of how that's worked in your family, where since you have so many more children, I imagine they learn from each other all the time. So how have you used that to your advantage, or how has that worked out in your family?
Bonnie,
I don't know if that's too general.
I'm still processing the question. Bonnie, I'll tell you, I'm a
I think it is a really good question. And there are so many different dynamics. Obviously, as there's a dynamic between each child, there's a dynamic between each child and each parent. So it just means like we have this crazy network of webs of relationships in our family. And so it is a complex question to answer. Two things I'll say. One thing is it is really neat to watch the younger ones see that example and do similar things. Like you're saying, the kid that wants to get up and exercise with his big brother, or the one that wants to go for a run or read scripture with them or whatever it is. It's so fun to watch them model their lives similarly. But on the other hand, there are decisions that our older children make that maybe we don't want our younger children continuing to make. And also just maturity issues, right? As soon as the oldest child started watching a little bit more mature movies and TV shows, then we had to be really cognizant of what the little ones were watching because they would just walk in the room or so that has been something that has been a little bit of a challenge is saying, okay, these ages, this is appropriate. These ages, this is not appropriate. And one thing I do love is getting my older kids on my team with protecting the innocence of the younger ones. We actually had a whole episode about this because it can be very easy for those younger ones to just slip into the more mature themes and topics. Even what we're talking about around the dinner table is sometimes not appropriate for the little ones. So we wait till they run off to play. But when I get those big kids on my side, they're like, oh, hey, we can't watch this around so and so. We can't talk about this around so and so. Let's protect their innocence and we'll just bring it back up later. I think that's a really beautiful thing to teach them.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Audrey, did you think
yes.
of an idea?
Yeah. So we just recorded an episode about the blessings of having a large family. And I think the relationships that the kids have with each other is one of the best blessings of a large family. Something I didn't know going into it. I have 3 siblings, so there was just 4 of us. And like we had great relationships and all that. But to see like your teenager hold your baby and cuddle it and take care of it, take care of its needs, like that really is amazing. And then the dynamic, like they grow up, like Bonnie was saying, protecting this little kid because they held him and fed him and changed him and took care of him when they were a big. It's almost like they have a piece of their sibling success in their own hands because they were there. It's just so beautiful to see these relationships develop. And then when you see them developing, like when you get into the teenagers and they're developing these relationships independent of you and outside of your relationship, like you're not with the 8 and 9-year-olds and you're saying, okay, we need to get along and we're going to be 20 years. We want to be friends. But you see them as teenagers and they're like choosing to go on a coffee date together and they're going shopping together and they're doing all this stuff together, these relationships. And then they're like, the teenagers are like, oh, hey, let's go do this thing. And let's take along our little 6-year-old sister because she's cool too. And let's take her. Like, it's so special as a parent to watch them developing their own relationships. And of course, we live in a day of technology. So my kids let me read their text messages and they'll be like, oh, hey, look what my sibling texts me. And it's just like amazing. Like they have this beautiful relationship and it all happened independently of me. That is one thing that I just love, like the sibling relationship. So yes, the younger kids looking up to the older kids, absolutely. All of my younger kids have a goal to be as tall as their oldest brother. Now, listen, he's 6'9". Okay. Are they going to make it?
Maybe not.
All of them, girls, boys, all of them, they're looking up to their oldest brother and they're like, we are going to be as tall as him someday. And I'm like, yeah, honey, you don't have a chance because girls just don't get 6'9". But I'm not going to say that because I'm fostering that special relationship that she has looking up to her big brother.
And it's powerful because I was thinking of that question of what are the advantages of large family. I decided to table it, but then you brought it in and answered it anyways, which I appreciate because we do hear a lot about sibling rivalries, but we don't hear the other side of it, all the positive things of the sibling relationship. And one of our reasons why we do a structured family meeting is because we don't want them to be in the first meeting outside of the household. We want them part of a high performance team within our household before they go out there. And your kids have such an advantage for learning relationships and taking care of people and what it takes to manage that at a younger age than most people.
And you mentioned family meetings, and this is the other question I was going to ask because I know, Bonnie, you brought it up earlier about family meetings when you brought up your respect poster. And I do love posters and laminating things. So I think we're on the same page there. How do you have a special schedule, both of you, for how you run your family meetings or when you do them, or are they random?
So we actually used to have a regular schedule. We used to try to do them every Sundays, but I found that it was getting a little bit unanticipated. Kids were like, oh, I don't want to do this thing again. So what we do is we have a little tradition around the dinner table. We just talk about the high and the low of the day after while we're eating. And that is usually just the time that we address anything that needs to be addressed. It's usually just calendaring issues. Like, hey, you guys remember dad's going to be out of town today. I could really use some help on this or that. We do have a pretty reliable calendaring system. And so things usually work themselves out that way. But that's when we bring up anything that hasn't been working lately. Recently, we've had some sibling rivalry issues more than usual. And so we'll bring that up and say, and we really look at it instead of everybody sitting here listening to the boring CEO of the family talk about things. We really ask for feedback and encouragement. Sometimes it's just a tattle session. I think this should happen because so-and-so did this thing. But we try to stay away from that and say, what do you suggest? What could help all of us bring a little bit more peace into our home? Or what could help us learn to serve each other a little bit better? And then we get kids to tell us and we just come up with solutions together. It's really neat.
Yeah, kids have really great ideas. We've done that. One of our big topics is tech time, how they spend it, how much time they spend on it. And oftentimes, when we sense that this is a problem, we give it back to them in the family meeting and they come up with wonderful solutions and they have more buy in when they came up with it. So, Audrey, how do you do yours or do you do those?
Yeah, we don't have a formal family meeting, but we have a lot of times when our family is together discussing things. Well, so we don't sit down and have a family meeting. But Bonnie said, dinner conversation with a large family is so incredible because the teenagers, young adults, the adults, they can all sit around and talk and have some of the most incredible conversations ever. The littles can stay and listen to it or they can leave. And it's not necessarily discussing family things, but if that comes up, that's what we discuss. We do have a Monday morning, like meeting with when we get ready to do homeschool for the week. And I'll say, okay, this is what is on the calendar for this week. And this is what you need to keep in mind with your schedule and working in your schoolwork or on this kind of stuff and bring up anything that's going on or issues of the week that are going to apply to that week ahead. So that's like a little school meeting to start off the week. And then we often have a morning Bible study together as well. And just every topic you can imagine comes up during the morning Bible study. So those are like informal, knowing the personalities of my husband and I and our kids. If we did like a scheduled family meeting, it would be like so corny and so forced and everybody, like nobody would do anything good come out of it because it would be just
I guess that's the special thing about families, right? We're all unique, and there certain things will work for you that might not work for us, and I might be able to adopt something you're doing that would work for us. So I like that it sounds like both of you do find a time so your kids know that if there's an issue that needs addressing, they can bring it to this Monday morning part or every night at dinner, they know they can look forward to addressing it then. So I appreciate that.
I have one more because I know we're going over our 45 minutes and I know your lives are very busy. And so I have one more and they'll see if Mel has one. And then I'll have a final question for you, a little finisher. This one's probably a simpler one. I've noticed that you have a good sense of humor. even on your Instagram. I think you had 580 pounds of kids. I think I saw that on a post. I thought it was pretty funny. And I do find a sense of humor is like a superpower as a parent. When something goes wrong, it just is what it is. Sometimes it's funny. And have you found a sense of humor important, or how has that developed? I know you have one because I've read your posts, but how does that play out when you're talking with your children and your families?
Oh, I think 580 pounds, Joe, was what Bonnie and I have lost weight, how much weight we've lost from all of our pregnancies. But
That's what it
Bonnie, we
was.
should,
Okay.
yeah, Bonnie, we totally should add up all our kids' weights because that would be like 2 cars weight or something. Uh, a sense of humor is so important. And I think being a parent has given me a sense of humor. Like, okay, so I'll bring up this one little example. A couple weeks ago, my kids created the Rascals Club, and it's just as rascally as it sounds. And I think in my early parenting years, I might have squashed the Rascal Club. Like, I'd have been like, absolutely no, we're not gluing a fork to the floor so everybody can walk past and try to pick it up 20 times a day. But now I think it's funny, and I might be contributing to the Rascals Club a bit myself. But I think Bonnie and we considered a whole bunch of different taglines at the beginning of putting our podcast together. And humor was definitely way up there in what we were looking for. Some of our taglines were pretty hilarious that we didn't go with. But humor is what keeps you going as a parent. Because otherwise we talk about being the fun parent or the not fun parent. If you're not the fun parent, you're just gonna hate parenting and your whole family experience. And what's the point of that? So balancing humor, like sometimes I'm laughing when I should be correcting, and sometimes I'm correcting when I should be laughing. Getting it right isn't always successful, but definitely having humor as one of the tools in your toolbox is such a good idea as a parent.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, on our podcast, every episode we have a funny mom moment because motherhood is hilarious. Kids do the darndest things. And of course, in the moment, especially those first 10 or 15 years of motherhood, everything is drama. It's, oh, how could you do this thing? But it doesn't matter. Even if you can't laugh at it now, write it down because you will laugh at it later. And being able to step into that part of motherhood has been super powerful where I can look and just go, this is funny. Yeah, they just dumped 12 eggs on the floor. This is hilarious. And it's a mess, but let's just laugh and enjoy it. In fact, when I was being raised, my dad used to always say, don't lose your sense of humor. As soon as tempers would flare a little bit and we'd get upset, don't lose your sense of humor. And then we'd all, okay, haha. It is a very powerful deterrent to anger, frustration. When emotions run high, just laugh about it. It's the best way.
Mel laughs a lot. She has one sister. I have three brothers. So there's four of us, and then we have three sons. So she's getting that boy humor for the first time.
I am.
It's gross.
I'm like, no, quit encouraging them. Like, I got to be the adult here,
Well,
and I want to laugh too.
his
But
mom will scold me for laughing. And I'm just like, I grew up in a more serious family. And this is just better. Like I came home the other day from an orthodontist appointment with my boys and it didn't go great. And I was very frustrated. And I go to Joe and then he comes out and cracks a few jokes, but then obviously tells the kids how things should have gone. And we address it and we learn from it. But without that humor, I could have just lost it. You know what I mean? I think we have a good system with that. And yes, the boy humor has definitely softened my heart a bit. So my last question is silly, but I really need to know, how do you feed your families?
Broth
We
style? Is that what
I
you're
was gonna
saying?
say, we have another series about this too, of feeding a family about
I
every
bet.
meal and everything. Yeah, really, it's just whatever normal family would do times like 3 or 4. It goes through phases, right? Like for quite a while, probably the first 12 to 13 years, we just made a little bit more, and my kids were so young, they didn't eat that much. But now it's just you get real productive. And there are certain things we don't do because they're like individual servings kind of thing. You don't do that. You do casseroles, you do meats and proteins that are going to fill kids up quickly and not take a lot of time. So it is a learning experience, but after a while you get some of your favorite recipes going in rotation and you teach those kids how to help make it. So you're not on the hook for every single meal and you're golden.
Awesome.
Yeah, two lessons that we've learned that might help your audience listening. Number one is we feed our kids a nutrient dense diet. So it is easy to think we're going to save money if we feed them mac and cheese and chicken fingers like kid food. But in the long run, they're going to eat more because they're hungry. They're starving for nutrients. Our grocery bill is higher than our house payment. It is like our highest expense is our food bill. But we feel like feeding our kids a nutrient dense diet, they actually eat less because they're not look for nutrients. We do spend a lot of money on food, but our medical bills are almost zero. And in the long run, they eat less food because what they're eating is nourishing their bodies better. And then just a practical thing that we do is instead of everybody sitting around the table and passing food, like that, you just have to, there would be so much planning that goes into that. You put a big kid and a little kid, or you don't let the little kids sit together, or does everybody wait to eat their food? It's just chaos. So what we have done is we stand in the kitchen, we all give grace, and then we do it like cafeteria style. So everybody picks up their plates, goes down each side of the island, filling up their plates, and everybody actually gets to eat faster than if we tried to. Now, I tell my kids, if you were going to sit down and have a meal with the king, the Queen of England, you would have no clue because your manners are terrible when you're sitting down trying to pass food. You don't have a clue, but everybody gets fed every meal.
Yes.
Are-
Changing to cafeteria style was huge for us too.
Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
there's a lot of good lessons there. They're near and dear to my heart because after I was done high school teaching, I had started to come in the fitness industry and health space that still exists. And I like your point, even though it's a quick one, like your other expenses come down if you eat well and you eat nutritious foods and you have the protein, like you mentioned, Bonnie, and the high nutrients, like you mentioned, Audrey, that you're not spending as much time sick, out of school, missing things. You have more energy to do free outdoor activities, hike, bike, go out and play when you're not feeling like a sloth all the time. And those things do have a dollar cost that often get lost in the food bill cost. So it's really cool that you mentioned that. I have one final question for you too. So you have so much experience. We talked about experience at the beginning. If we were to hit the rewind button and you were to be able to pass yourself a note right when you first started having kids, what's the one thing that you would write? You only get a post-it note, not a lot. You can't write a whole book and pass it to you. What's the one or two tips you would tell yourself at the beginning of this journey?
Okay, so we love this question because we actually have a whole series called What I Would Tell a Younger Me.
You can only choose one.
So we dive deep on different topics, what we telling yourself. But my post-it note would say, it is worth it.
I love
Well
that.
said.
You
That's
even
beautiful.
left space for a doodle on your post-it note. I like that. All right, Bonnie.
Our unofficial tagline of the podcast is lower your expectations. And that is probably what I would say. I would say you're doing a perfect job. Lower your expectations. It's going to be just fine.
Grace is so powerful. So thank you so much for joining us in the Strong Family Project. Before we sign off, where can our listeners hear more about you? I know you have your website, you have your Zencast, you have your Instagram. Where do you prefer people go?
You can listen to our podcast, Outnumbered the Podcast, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. We're on every platform. And on Instagram, we're at Outnumbered the Podcast. We also have a YouTube channel where you can see us talk about these things. And that is just search for Outnumbered the Podcast on YouTube.
And that's excellent. We'll put the podcast link in the show notes for anyone who wants to just go down and click on it and listen to it. Thank you so much, Bonnie and Audrey, for your experience that you shared with all of us today. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.